Welcome to Changing the Sales Game on webtalkradio.com. I'm your host, Connie Whitman. Thanks for joining us this week. So here's the deal, right? That word change, when we hear it, no matter what you're trying to change, your sales, your career, relationship with your boss, whatever it is, I know it can be a little bit overwhelming. So to help you on your journey, I have found in my decades during my career and in business, it all boils down to how we build relationships and really, really how we communicate. So in the show notes, my gift to you is my communication style assessment. 2 reports after taking the quiz will get emailed to you. First report, your natural communication superpowers. It's how you show up without thinking. Kind of important to know. You want to leverage that. And of course, you want to build from there. Flip side, though, when we speak with people who speak or communicate 180 degrees different than us, how is our message truly landing? So again, that report you will receive. I highly recommend reading that 2 or 3 times so you really understand your blind spots and potentially how to make them better. So my quote for today that I chose to set the stage for my conversation with my guest is by Thomas Edison. And Thomas says, "Our greatest weakness lies in giving up. The most certain way to succeed is always to try just one more time." Now, this quote, for me at least, translates to the need for some form of a follow-up or consistent follow-up process. So in my 7-step sales process, right, my last step, the 7th step, is follow-up. I call mine CPR. Right? We got to keep our client alive in our orbit and in our system. So CPR, though, this is the important piece of the puzzle, stands for consistent, persistent, and for me, the big word, respectful follow-up. So now here's the deal. I know what my consistent, persistent, respectful follow-up looks like. You'll have to figure that out based on your role, your industry, et cetera. But everybody needs a follow-up process that they use to the nth degree. So when I train, I always tease and say, we have to follow up, and follow up again. Did you hear me? Follow up. So that's how important follow-up is. So who is my guest today that we are going to talk about? We're going to dial into this topic, but it really translates into success, whether that's in business, sales, or in your own career. So my guest is Doug Brown. Doug is the CEO of Sales Strategy, is a sales revenue and profit growth. He created the reliable, predictable, measurable, math-based model for sales revenue growth, helping companies, business owners, business consultants dramatically increase sales. He has raised close rates by 157%, boosted sales by 4,150% for Tony Robbins and Chet Holmes, and generated over $9 million in sales. His latest venture, Vibitno, which is what we're talking about today, enhances follow-up efficiency to prevent lost sales. Doug, thank you for being on and bringing your brilliant mind to the table. I appreciate it.
Hey, Connie, thanks for having me here. I really appreciate it. I did want to tell everybody, you said 9 million in sales. I wanted to add 2 zeros to that. So
I didn't say 900 million?
No, I didn't hear 900.
Oh, I thought I said 900. My notes said 900, so I'm cross-eyed today, Doug.
It's interesting, because I do those things all the time, right? I say something and then somebody will say, "Did you say that?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I did."
Yes. Oops. I love it. So let's talk about, why do you see so many business owners and just sales professionals, right? Because that's our world, lose out on up to 68% of potential sales. And where does follow up, where have you found it kind of falls into that mix to reduce or improve our numbers?
Yeah, so the 68% actually came from a guy named J. Conrad Levinson, who wrote a book series called Guerrilla Marketing. And I was, I'll say, privileged enough to, be able to hang around with people like that. And so I was talking to Jay one time. Now, if those people who don't know Jay, he's passed on, but Jay is responsible for some very legendary campaigns. The Marlboro Man, for example, was one of his campaigns.
Sure.
The Pillsbury Doughboy he helped create. Things like that. And
iconic.
Yes, iconic. And I was talking to Jay I asked him about marketing because that's what his forte was. I said, "Jay, what's the number one challenge in marketing for people?" And he said, "Patience." And I said, "Huh." He's like, Doug, what people don't know was like, even with the Marlboro Man and the Pillsbury Doughboy, like the Marlboro Man, we spent $10 million and it failed along the way.
Hmm.
And they were going to scrap the Marlboro Man ad because originally they were trying to do the Marlboro Man toward the female population. They were trying to get more women to smoke cigarettes, right? Which, you know, depending on how you feel about that, it resonates one way or another. But he said it almost failed, and then they realized, you know, it didn't. But it took them over a year to dial it in, and it cost him over $10 million. He said, so patience is the hard part. Even with the Pillsbury Doughboy, it took a long time to dial in the, you know, the woo or whatever the kid, you know, the Pillsbury Doughboy says when you poke him in the belly. And so I said, well, that's great, Jay. I said, well, what's the number one challenge you see in sales? He goes, Doug, 68% of sales are lost due to lack of follow-up.
Hmm.
And I said, no way. It's not that high. I'm a young kid at this point, right? I'm like, really? It's that high? He goes, yeah, believe it or not. And so I started researching this, and I could find some scattered data on points on there, but it was all resonating with what he said. Then I found a study that a company called HubSpot did, and then one called Marketo. And they said, both of them in their studies, on the spot, that 62% of incoming leads coming in on a website that are a lead will close, but it takes up to a year to close all 62%. And the majority of people are culling, depending on the stats, between 20, 25%. So they're leaving all of this stuff on the table. And it goes back to what Jay said. It's patience. It takes up to a year to close them, and they close about 4.6% a month on average. And so I was like, oh, okay, this is pretty accurate. You know, I've got multiple sources now telling me this. So follow-up's got to be a problem. And then, Connie, it happened to me. So I went on vacation. You know, my oldest daughter, Rebecca,
Yes.
and Rebecca was an infant. So this was 25 years ago. And I went to Florida. We took Rebecca, and Rebecca got sick while we were there, which was always a parent's concern, especially a new parent. And so we took her to the hospital, and they said, hey, she's got to have some antibiotics, and you can't fly for 3 days. So I was like, okay. So I called back. I was working for a company at the time. I called the head of sales, and I said, listen, you know, thanks for having people cover my sales while I'm gone, all my messaging. I need another 3 days. And they went, Doug, no problem. You're the number one rep here, so we'll do anything for you. And I said, cool. Come back 3 days later. My voicemail is completely jammed full. No more incoming messages could be received because it was full.
Oh.
My email had been completely maxed out. And I'm looking at these messages, and I'm going, oh boy. So I'm listening to the voicemail, and the first message was a guy named Jerry. Doug, come on over. I'm ready to buy.
Oh.
Doug, you know, and the second one, beep, you know, Doug, where the heck are you? I need you to come on over here. It's Jerry.
Oh.
Third one, beep, Doug, what the heck? I'm getting pressured by my CEO to make a decision, and you're the guy
Oh.
we want to do business with. Number 4, beep, Doug, I can't wait any longer. You know, long story short, right?
Oh.
I called Jerry back. I go, Jerry, listen, I'm sorry. This is what happened. He goes, Doug, I get it. I got kids. You know, I said, look, you're 15 minutes from me. I'll be right over. He said, you can come over. I'd love to have a cup of coffee with you, but I got to tell you something. I said, what? He goes, I bought from Lightship.
Oh.
I'm like, they're our number one competitor. He goes, yeah, I know.
You
He
weren't
said, I
out.
wanted to buy from you. I said, all right, Jerry, I got the point. He's like, you know, you just, I didn't hear. The CEO was pressuring me, came to me one day, said, get this deal done. I had to do it that day. I said, all right, I still love you. Appreciate it. I'm curious, Jerry. Lightship. When did you talk to them? Because I've been talking to you for 2.5 months. He said, oh, they cold called me last week.
Oh. Oh. Punch in the gut.
Yeah. And he alluded, hey, my CEO is a little pissed off at your company right now, right? That's what he said.
Yeah.
And I said, I totally get it. Let me take care of the first things first. So here's the deal. It was a 5-year agreement. The total of the agreement was $125,000 sale. My commission on that sale was $25,000.
Ugh.
It cost me $4,000 to go on vacation. All of this information started coming back to me, and I'm like, I'm not happy. By the way, there were more than one drop
Situation.
sale.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I called a friend of mine who had he was the #1 rep at another company. And I said, dude, what's your biggest challenge? He goes, getting things into play and following up. And I said, well, that seems to be my biggest challenge. So let's meet at Panera Bread and write down all our complaints and everything we want to solve. And that's what we did. And I then didn't, technology wasn't what it is today. So back then I started doing this on calendaring.
Yes.
Paper calendars, right?
Yes.
And I would follow up with people, and I would just make sure every month I would follow up. Every month I would follow up. Well, I followed up with a little company that 2 years later, they said, let's do business. And it turned out to be a company called NASCAR. And so 2 years of follow-up NASCAR, right? So it's one of those things that I was doing on paper and sticky notes and, remember the index cards? Like,
Oh my God. Yes. And the Pentaflex files. Yes. I'm breaking a dives.
So that's what I was doing. I was moving the follow-up from,
Papers,
I'd
yeah.
have 12 boxes, and I'd move the boxes from January to February to,
Sure. Yeah.
and the solidification of this came from, I talked to, do you remember a guy named Harvey McKay? He wrote a book called Swim with the Sharks.
Yep.
Well, Harvey was known as the greatest networker in the world at that time. And I saw Harvey speak one time, and it was so cool. I won a sales contest. Harvey McKay and Tony Robbins. This is where I met Tony Robbins. There were 120 of us in the room. They both came in and presented to 120 of us. It was just amazing. But I was so moved by what he said. I walked over to Harvey at the end. I said, Mr. McKay, I really appreciate the information you just conveyed. I have some questions for you. And he looked at me, Connie, and he said, okay, kid, carry my bag to my limo and you can ask me anything you want. So I'm like, sure. I carried his bag and I asked him these questions, and he told me this story. I said, Mr. McKay, you have $100 million company. How did you get your sales? And he said, this is the way I do it. I take and I keep a dossier of personal information on my clients, not like the FBI, but if they have children and they have children's interest and, all of the things about their business. And I write this down, and, I actually call it the McKay 66. I have 66 fields. And I said, well, that's really cool. He said, yeah, you want to hear a story? And I said, yeah. He said, let me tell you why I closed a $10 million deal of the $100 million company that's recurring every year. He said, I had been prospecting somebody for 3 years, and they weren't giving me really the time of the day, but I was capturing all this information, and I stayed in touch with them every single month. And then when I was calling into the company, they said, no, Mr. X isn't here today. He's at the hospital. His son got in an accident. And he said, I knew that was my opportunity, because I knew that keeping this information and staying in touch, that the son actually was a big hockey fan. And these people lived in Minnesota. So back then, the Minnesota North Stars were the actual hockey team. He said, so Doug, what I did is I went out and I hired 3 Minnesota North Stars to go to the hospital and sit with this kid for an hour. And I did. And miraculously, we signed a $10 million contract a week later with his father.
Yep.
And that was the solidification point. I was like, this is not just a level 2 problem. This is a level 1 problem for people, right?
Yeah.
So how much money are they dropping?
Yes.
And, I'm a statistics guy. So then I looked and I said, well, what if we're only off by 10%? And Connie, do you know there's about 1 trillion transactions that happen daily across the globe? So if we dropped 1% of 1 trillion transactions on a daily basis, that's a huge number.
Crazy.
Right? Now, if we applied that to airplanes, for example, right? I think there's 100,000 flights a day. Imagine if 10% of them didn't land properly.
Oh my God, exactly.
So this is analogous to what happens in business due to lack of follow-up. And that's why that 68% actually resonates.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. So I had new company 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And I know this one bank, like they were the perfect client for me, size, their culture, they were ready for me and the way I process and do sales. They didn't hire me for 5 years. They went with these bigger organizations, more technological. Their people were not ready for these more technology driven. They weren't able to speak, let alone set up the processes in the back end. So after 5 years, exactly what you said, every quarter following up, who broke a leg, who had an anniversary, whose kid got married, you get personal. And I would keep all these notes, dossier, I like that word. And I remember I finally followed up and I went in and I said, they had a meeting with me. They always gave me the meeting, but they kept saying, you're too small, you're too small. And I thought, they're not ready for me. They're not ready for me. Finally go in and I said, I know you've worked with this company, and this company. Their jaws dropped and they go, yep. And I go, and I know you spent millions of dollars and I know you've created some things so we can build from there, but they're way too advanced for what you're saying. Yeah. And they're nodding and nodding and nodding. As soon as I said, we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because all these other companies came and said, yeah, we don't care what you did in the past. Our way is the right way. Our process is the right process. I listened to my clients and I said, we'll build. I'm not saying we're not going to change it, but we'll build with what we already have in place and build from there, because it's still sales, right? So let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, save some money, expedite things, right? We can move faster because there's language already in place, blah, blah, blah. And they were like, you got the business. I worked with them for 15 years. We're talking millions and millions and millions of dollars. So it's exactly what your point you just made. I followed up diligently, consistent, persistent, respectfully for 5 years and made millions from that contract every year. So this stuff works. The other thing I want to comment on your story where your daughter got sick and you had to stay away. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have computers back then. So
Yeah.
everybody's like, why didn't you just email it? Because we didn't have access to that stuff on a phone. We didn't have laptops that we took with us. You were on vacation, business got left behind. So today's world, here's the challenge, Doug, right? Is you still want to be on vacation with your family, but you still need to have a pulse on what's going on, especially what you're saying with sales, et cetera. So a week vacation, people understand things happen. Now we're connected, that really we don't have to drop the ball. So for me, there's no excuse today for people to not do diligent follow-up. That was the point I wanted to make based on that story that you shared as well.
Well, I get goosebumps when I hear that because I'm in agreement. And it's to give somebody kind of another example of this, Connie, not in a bad way, but in a good way, right? So because many people like, oh yeah, okay, I know I'm dropping the ball, but the reality is that you can spawn new sales like you did for following up for 5 years, worth millions of dollars. And the thing is it doesn't have to be, and this is where people get follow-up all wrong. It's not that you have to be perfect in your follow-up.
No.
Right? It could just be something that's, as long as it's personalized, meaningful, relevant, like you said, your CPR, right? I think it was consistent, persistent, and resilient.
Respectful.
Respectful. Thank you. As long as it's those attributes, a short follow-up message can go a long way.
Absolutely.
So I remember I had a client that I loved them. They loved me. They had good results the first time. They went from 3.5 million to 6 million in a year. They were super happy. And we just, weren't doing business, but I just liked them. So every once in a while I'd send something out like, hey, how's your son doing? Or how, what's going on? And I remember I was going to California and I was going to be there in business and take a little vacation while I was there. And I just sent a text message to the CEO of the company saying, hey, I'm going to be in your area. Would love to say hi. And it was just, in person. And he texted me back. He's like, let's have lunch. And so he and his son, who was, older now, but still, part of his, daily life that he was always in contact with, showed up for lunch. And so I'm sitting there talking with him and they're saying, yep, we're doing these great things. Everything's going on. Life is good. And we're having that conversation. And they said, we're trying to figure out how to grow the business. And I said, well, you want some input? And they said, sure. I said, I'd build an agency program. You're in a space. And then they both said to me, well, what's that? And I said, well, this is what you do. You're creating independent agents for your company and blah, blah, blah. And I said, you know what? Call me anytime you want. I'll tell you everything I know. I built a $30 million agency. I built different agencies with clients. And they said, well, that's great. So Connie, I'm on vacation. 3 days later, I get a phone call and they said, we love this agency idea. Will you help build it for us or will you just build it for us? And I said, well, I can't build it for you because it's a thing, but I can certainly help you. And they said, well, you know what? We'll pay you $180,000 this year if you come in and help us.
It's fabulous.
I didn't even have to give them the price, right? It was like, so I'm like, okay. And so the reason I want to bring these stories up is because your follow-up doesn't have to be perfect. It's got to be respectful, as you said. It's got to be consistent, as you said. It's got to be persistent, as you said. But it doesn't have to be, dear first name, I want to let you know, blah, blah. It doesn't have to be that stuff. And to add to that, to what Harvey was saying, personalization, meaningful, and relevant. And there was a gentleman who sold his business in Arizona. It was an aviation business. He made like 24 times EBITDA. It was crazy. He did amazing. He's retired. It was an aviation company. And I was talking to him. I said, what month's your birthday? And he told me, and I said, okay. So I was typing in online, what momentous things happened because his birthday was coming up during the month of November, I believe it was. And long story short, National Aviation Month.
That's cool.
Right? So I send him just an email saying, hey, I don't know if you know this or not. I want to wish you a happy birthday, but I don't know if you know, but your birth month and National Aviation are the same. And I find it, uncanny that you sold an aviation company.
Why?
And I said, oh, by the way, there's 3 other great events that happened during this month that I picked up on. Thought you might enjoy these. That was it. What do you think he did?
Called you.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my God, I didn't know this. Right? This is so cool. By the way, we've started another company. I'd like you to, there we go, right?
There you go.
And
Top
so,
of mind.
Yeah. And so that's that's the key word. The key phrase, I should say, top of mind awareness, right? So those of you who are listening to us go back and forth on this important issue, what are you doing to keep top of mind awareness? Because you not only do you sell things, but you have relationship capital that gets leveraged.
Absolutely.
And if, think about it in this terms, folks, like how many people do you know throughout your life or have known throughout your life that if you just had been able to stay in touch with them, other relationships open up due to those things?
Sure. Introductions, whatever. Yeah.
Right. And it doesn't have to necessarily even be a business relationship. It could be someone you were friends with and their uncle got promoted to a certain position, and that uncle or aunt now could be your conduit to what you were seeking to achieve, but you never stayed in touch. So now calling them back and saying, hey, it's been 12 years. I just want to get to your uncle might feel a little
sleazy.
Sleazy. Right. So, but here's the thing, you can always start to reestablish relationships. And what I've learned, Connie, through those relationships is that you can reach out to these people and just say, hey, I was thinking about you. And by the way, I even noticed your uncle got promoted. I'm trying to get into ABC company. Can we first just catch up?
That's right.
And going back to your being respectful. And so this is what I want people to catch is follow-up will boost your sales a minimum by 5 to 15%.
Easy.
A minimum.
Yep.
If one is just, as you said, CPR, right? Consistent, persistent, and respectful. and you stay in that loop. And I know this because I've tested these numbers on a minimum level. I've
Yep.
tested these numbers on a high level.
Yep.
And all we have to do is stay in touch, because you compound the interest through relationships
Right.
and business opportunities. And by the way, personal opportunities that open up that you never could imagine would open up.
Yep.
And, and so, that's why follow-up's so important. And it is the lowest cost
I know.
method.
I know.
It costs literally
I know.
zero in most cases.
Yeah. It's discipline, I think, Doug. People don't have, if you don't have a process, it's like anything else. Oh yeah, I'm going to follow up this week. When, how, you can't just decide one day I'm going to follow up. You have to have a process in place. And so here's my next question. What are some of the most common follow-up mistakes that you see? So people could say, oops, I'm doing that. I'm doing that. I'm doing that. Right. And how can they avoid, like, what are some quick fixes? Again, I don't know if there's a quick fix, maybe there is, but what are some of the most common mistakes you see?
Yeah. So the first is what I think you had said, the 100-degree message landing, in the beginning
Yep.
and that message landing is the biggest mistake. And the biggest mistake because of that is me first.
Absolutely.
Right. So how many emails do we all get on a daily basis? Like,
Yeah.
hey, hire me for your SEO team, or, for business wise, or, your mortgage can be this, right? I mean, it all sounds like they're trying to talk about us, but the message really is about, let me tell you who I am, why I'm so great, why you
Yep.
should be doing business with me,
Yep.
why you should even be, care, right? Versus leading with what they're looking for.
Yeah.
So the cause of that is you don't know enough about the person that you're actually going out to. Okay. The second thing is not being personalized or meaningful or relevant. Relevancy is huge in this thing. Relevant means you're not going to send a Merry Christmas email or text message or voicemail or phone call to somebody in April. And
It's a good example.
right.
Yeah.
So unless you plan and say, hey, I'm sending you a Merry Christmas message in April because you are so important to me in my life that I wanted to be the first one to say Merry Christmas to you this year, right? That would be more meaningful to most people.
Yeah.
And it would still be relevant depending on the relationship.
Yeah.
And it would certainly be personalized and respectful to your R in your CPR. So I think that's the number one thing that happens. Number two is they have no system around this, as you said, no process.
Yep.
And so without a process, things are just going to get busy, and deprioritization is going to take effect, and you just forget. I think one of the big ones in sales, Connie, that is huge is people think because they get the first initial signal
Yeah.
that they're not interested in what they want to offer. So instead of them continuously building a relationship, I call it R bar, right? Like always be building a relationship
I like it.
instead of always be closing.
Yeah.
And the building that relationship, remember the statistics, folks, even HubSpot and Marketo, 62% of leads will close, but they take over about a year or so to close 62%.
Absolutely.
So the challenge is that there's not enough consistency in there because they go, oh, hey, I don't sense that this person is serious or going to buy now. Can I tell a story on that one?
Sure. This is important. This is an important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. So now this is a sales consultants training call. These people sell sales consulting to other companies.
Okay.
I think you're going to cringe on this one, Connie, knowing you.
Uh-oh.
See, Connie and I know a little bit about each other now and over time. All All right. So I show up on this. A friend invites me, says, hey, we just monitor this, will you? I'm like, sure. A lady shows up on the call and we'll call her Kim because it wasn't her name. And Kim shows up on the call and says, guys, you got to follow up. That's my message for you today. And the facilitator said, well, what happened, Kim? She said, 7 months ago to the day, I called this gentleman. And the day is today. 7 months ago, I called him. I got the impression he was not that interested when I called him 7 months ago, but he said to me, listen, I have so many company priorities going on right now. This is something I actually seriously want to talk about, but I can't even talk to you for 6 months.
Absolutely.
Would you call me back? She said, sure. Wrote down, call him back in 6 months. And then things got busy and I had all kinds of things going on and I didn't call him back in 6 months. And so I called him back this morning and I said, Sean, I'm so sorry. I know I said I'd call you back in 6 months. However, I dropped the ball, things got busy, etc. He said, I'm so glad you called me, Kim. I've been waiting to hear from you. And she said, well, that's cool. Why don't we dive back into where we started, 7 months ago, and I'll help you get to where you want to go. He goes, I would love to, but Kim, I don't think you got the message. She goes, what? I'm already doing business with your company.
Oh,
What, what do you mean? She says. He said, Kim, I bought from Ron. Ron didn't tell you? And she goes, Ronnie R from New York? He goes, no, Ronnie P from Seattle. And she said, well, what do you mean? He said, about a month ago, Ronnie P called me and said, hey, I'm from your company. And honestly, Kim, I thought maybe you left the company because I hadn't heard back from you. So I started talking to Ronnie and, and we literally inked the deal 2 weeks ago. Now, here's what she said. And my jaw dropped to the floor. Folks, my commission on that sale was $500,000 a year, and they signed a 5-year agreement.
oh, oh.
Right? So us assuming that they're not interested and then we deprioritize was Kim's mistake, which goes back to the fourth mistake, not even following up at all. Connie, statistics show that half the people selling don't follow up one time.
Yeah.
Right. And only 13% of people follow up more than 3 times, but the average sale on a cold lead happens between the 5th and 22nd contact.
Absolutely.
So if we're not, now that's what happened to me. Remember when I lost my $25,000 commission? I had been following up for 2.5 months. So what happened was I prepped my competition to take the sale.
Yes.
But to your CPR, I wasn't consistent, right? I didn't follow up that following, week. That was my mistake.
Yeah.
Well, my mistake was that and trusting my director of sales to have somebody cover my calls, right? But, but it all comes back to us because we have the responsibility. And as you said today, technology's there. There's no excuse because right now voicemail would leave a message and transcribe it and send it to your phone, right? Back then you didn't have that. As you said, you had to put, dimes or quarters into a payphone in order to pick up your voicemail. And you were lucky if it would even pick up at that time. That was high advanced technology back then.
Yeah.
So, those are the 4. I mean, there's others, but those are 4 major ones that I see.
And it's funny, the Kim story for me, as you were talking, I'm like, wow, she's going to wait 6 months. See, I would have touched base after, and I would say to him, listen, see, I always get I'm going to follow up, right? I'm a pit bull follow up. Here's the thing though. I'll say to the client, look, I get you don't need it for the 6 months. That's really cool. I promise I will follow up. Here's the thing. Can I touch base with you in 3 months? get a temperature check, because if things are going slower on your end and you say, Con, wait 7 months, I'll just follow up 4 months later. If things are excelling on your end, maybe at that 3-month call, you're like, let's start to do some preliminary conversations. So would that be okay? And 99% of the time, the customer says, oh my God, if you don't mind, but if it's 6 months, I don't want to waste your time. And my response is, it's never a waste of time. Plus we get to say hi. I get to catch up. I hear what you're doing. It's better for both of us. See, again, you make it personal. It's not a heavy lift. What's the big deal? But what if things move forward? What if things move slower? I just want to make sure I'm in sync with you. And customer, that in of itself, because then if things like a kid gets sick, you could send an email saying, I'm going on vacation. Listen, I'm really focusing on my kids. Is there anything I need beforehand? Otherwise, I'll get back to you when I get back. I even do that with my clients. Or if now, we have cell phones, I'll say to my clients, because they go, we're not going to bother you on vacation. I said, what if, because we're building stuff, if there's an emergency, here's my cell phone number, just text me, say, can you check your emails? I hate to bother you. I'll happily do that. What's the big deal? So now there's no reason. We have all of this technology, plus we can let people know what the expectation is while we're on vacation. You set those boundaries and people will honor them. That's the other thing. But see, Doug, it goes back to what I started with and what you just ended with: relationships, communication, and it's all about that consistent, persistent, but the respectful piece, I think people forget about. We got to get that ick out of sales. And this is just one way of doing it. We're out of time, my friend, but this, I really hope everybody heard you. And your stories, it really exemplify the power of follow-up, whether we do it, right, the revenue coming in, or the revenue we're losing that we don't even realize. We're working way too hard. And I find the follow-up is the working smarter piece, because when people are ready to buy, you're top of mind. No matter if I'm going to call you in a month, but you're ready in 2 weeks, you're still going to call me, because you and I have been building this relationship about this topic, for the past 2 years or whatever it might be. We have to be in the game to win. And again, that word respectful, though, I want everybody to hear that. Don't badger your client where they go, oh God, what does she want? Or what does he want? You miss the boat if it comes to that. You want them to be excited for your phone call or your text message or email or whatever the follow-up process is. Doug, let me give your contact info. So guys, you have to have a million questions. So first thing, email Doug at ceosalesstrategies.com, website ceosalesstrategies.com. Also, Doug has a book out. I'm going to put that link. I'm sorry, not a book. He has a checklist that I'm going to put in the show notes. And your Vibitno is the software. Tell everybody about the checklist and then the software gift that you're given.
So the checklist is a revenue growth improvement model checklist. So you can really figure out how you're doing in your marketing and sales. You'll go down through the checklist and you'll be like, okay, here's where I'm deficient. Here's where I'm doing great. And so you'll know what to prop up or what you need to double down on. So it's a way of doing that. The Vibitno, which is Vibitno.com. There's a page up there now. We're doing a pre-release on this SaaS software. We actually took 2 years and built a personalized, meaningful, relevant, software, which does have the ability and will actually force the accountability on being consistent, persistent,
absolutely,
in the follow-up, but doing it in a respectful way. And we pulled from the fields of personas, and we built in all of what the persona fields that people would be, and the system will take the persona fields and actually wind it into the communication and do that for you automatically. And, because this was such a huge problem, and it does exactly what you said. Connie, it says, okay, we're never going to drop another sale again, not due to follow-up. And we're going to now open up new sales that we never probably would have got, because like Kim, as you said, if you had a follow-up in 3 months, and Kim had just sent an email out that just said, hey, Johnny, I was just thinking about you. I know we got a month or so. I just hope you're having a wonderful day. And that would have been enough for him to probably pick the phone up and call her and say, listen, The
We're ready.
timeline's moved a little bit. I got to buy in 30 days. Let's do it now.
Yeah.
Right. So by the way, folks, statistics clearly show that a client expects 3 to 5 minimum touch points before you give up. The minimum touch points. And 50% of those should be phone calls. So those of you who don't like to use the phone, sorry, people want you to use the phone, right?
Yeah.
So what about them? So Vibitno, actually the language of Vibitno, you know, people go, why'd you name it Vibitno? And because it means you matter in a
Ugh, I love it.
Slavic language.
I love it.
And Connie, I was looking for the URL, youmatter.com, but I couldn't get any variation of that. So I
Yeah.
took Vibitno.
I love it.
We're doing a pre-release. If people are interested in that, just, you know, put in
Reach out.
the subject line, you know, pre-release or Vibitno or whatever. We'll have a conversation, make sure it's right for them. And we're giving them tons of support on and around that process. So
I love it. So guys, I will put the link to Vibitno in the show notes as well. And you can go there or you can email Doug, whatever it is. But listen, if you have no process, he showed me before we started the show, real easy to use, captures everything you need, especially if you're doing nothing. This is very robust. So you can even grow into it. So don't be afraid when you look at the system thinking, oh, this is beyond my scope. Use what you need and you'll see you'll start weaving things into that follow-up process. Doug, thank you so much for both the checklist, because I think it's important that we start to analyze and shine lights on those blind spots, number one. And then number two is check out the Vibitno, because then you have an idea of what should be included in that follow-up. And you've built it. I mean, you've made it super easy for everybody. So thank you so much for being on and sharing your zone of genius, and always good to see you, my friend.
yeah, and I really appreciate you having me on. As always, I'm very, very grateful and thank you.
I love you. Just thank you so much for keep doing what you're doing. We need you in the world. And I hope you will join me weekly as we question, build, and discover, no matter where you are, on changing your sales game. My guests and I, we have your back. We have information. We have ideas. We have strategies. We have tools for you to excel, thrive, and grow. That is really our wish for you. So thank you for tuning in every week. Remember, information's a beautiful thing. If you do nothing with it, it's just information in your brain. Once you take action, follow up, follow up, follow up. Do I need to say it again? Follow up. Trust me, magic will happen on the back end. I love you all. You've been listening to Changing the Sales Game with me, your host, Connie Whitman, on webtalkradio.com. I am honored to have you on this journey of changing your sales game. And I truly hope that my guests and I inspire you to make the changes you need to move your career, business, sales to the next level. I love you all. Have a great week. And thanks again. Thanks again, Doug, for showing up too for me today.
Thank you, Connie.